I'm being serious.
No, it's good.
Have you learned anything so far? I mean, I've
Yeah.
only done 2 weeks, but we're in their third week. So what have you learned so far? Jeanette, I heard you say, yeah.
Yeah, I did. Because I was never really good in the Old Testament. And it's good to know, like, the Jewish Torah and how it ties with everything else. And I'm just finding it interesting.
Okay.
I loved learning about the Shema a couple weeks ago and thinking about how that ties in with Jesus's commandments to us. And just the focus and the importance. It's striking that it's really the same for us and our Jewish brothers and sisters. Yeah, one God and all that.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. So last week, what was our topic last week? Anybody remember?
We
It,
skipped.
Huh? Oh,
it
okay, the
was
week before. The week before.
Moses, and he was a prophet.
Okay. But was the theme? Do you
Um,
remember?
remember,
There you go. It was remember. So to kind of put it in perspective, we when we think about the Torah, so we're thinking about the 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And if we think about those books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers span a really, really super duper long period of time, from creation, Noah, the call of Abraham going, wherever he went, having his family, ending up in Egypt and then coming out with Moses and all that stuff for it. So it's a very long, long period of time. But then when we get to Deuteronomy, okay, Deuteronomy is really a book, but it's a single message. It's a single almost sermon from Moses. And that sermon is to who?
the people.
Okay, but so why is this important?
It's the second generation. The
Right.
other, okay.
Right. So this is the second generation. So remember, we had the first generation. They wandered in the desert for 40 years. Okay. They get to the brink of the promised land. It's right there. And God says, here it is. It's yours for the taking. All right. And so what do? They send 12 spies into the land and they wander around 40 days and they come back and report. And so what do they report?
People are
That
too big. We can't do it.
All right.
yeah.
So first and foremost, they said, this is great land. It's flowing with, milk and honey
Yeah.
and it'll be great. But we have a problem. And the problem is that
There's
there's
people there.
people there and they look big and strong. And
Hmm.
so, when they come back and the spies, as you will, talk, there was 12 of them, one for each tribe. Remember, uh, 10 of them said we shouldn't take the land, but 2 do. And because of that, the people decided not to go into the promised land. And so God makes them wander for 40 more years. And at that 40 years, that generation has been killed off or died off actually, and now we have their descendants, and so their descendants are there, and so we have this next generation that's coming up, and it's real important that they remember, they remember the history. So why is it important to remember history?
So you don't repeat it.
All right, so first of all, you don't want to repeat it, but we
Hmm.
already know, are they going to repeat it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's just the Bible's one big circle of repeating. You know, the same things that they did in the Old Testament are the same things that we do in the New Testament, the same things that we do now. Okay, so we repeat it, but hopefully we're going to learn from it. So okay, so history, so we hopefully don't repeat it. What else?
It helps you know who you are, what your identity is.
Right. Okay. It helps you to know who you are. Okay, so culturally, you look at our country, you look at our laws, you look at them, it gives you a sense of who we are sociologically. Why else is it important to remember?
To pass things on down to the next generation.
Okay, so you can pass things down to the next generation. Well, Debbie said, it's important because, it's important so that we know who we are. But what else is it important to remember?
Whose we are.
Whose we are. That, it's, while all this was going on, God was still present and God was still working. Okay, so last 2 weeks we really talked about this idea, introducing Deuteronomy as kind of this last farewell sermon from Moses, because we know at the end of this he dies. We spent some time, looking at remembering. And now this week, I'm going to share my screen for a second, just so we can look. Where's share? Okay, we'll make it with share sound. Okay, so everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so and this week our topic is obedience to God's command. We're going to be looking at chapter 4. As we think about, obedience to God's commands are what? The laws, right?
Right.
Okay. And so what do you think about the laws? We know some of them because we've studied, Leviticus and Numbers and that kind of stuff. So we've been introduced, because remember when we talked about Deuteronomy, a lot of the laws that come up in Deuteronomy are laws that have already been given, but in some ways, Moses is given commentary, or in some ways expounding on them. All right, so we already have these laws, and so we know a lot of them. But as we think about the Old Testament laws, what's your overall gut impression?
Are you talking about the 600 and some laws?
Yeah, there's 610 or 13. Sorry, 613.
Some of them, I wonder if they really did God really think that they should be included even like now? I mean, some of them are so extreme that I just wonder sometimes if he really meant for us meant people with the Jews in the 21st century to be still observing some of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But did they have all 613 then?
Well, most of them. Yeah.
I think they were to keep order in the people so they could live in community in an orderly way and take care of each other. I mean, for example, we were talking about the law where if a woman's husband died, and then who'd be inheriting and all that stuff, or if I guess if there were no brothers, things like that, then there was a petition to God to maybe consider changing this, and God did adapt, and so they were meant to be things to kind of keep a social order and social and have justice done.
Okay. Yeah, I think, as we think about some of the old, a lot of folks will say, okay, the Old Testament, we don't need to pay attention to that, right? We don't need to pay attention to it. We have a New Testament. and the New Testament has replaced the Old Testament. Or, hey, I don't need to know all those laws. Jesus said, we're going to keep it simple, stupid. We got 2 laws: love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself, right? So
Right.
if that's truth, then why are we here tonight? Why do we spend time in the Old Testament? Why do some scholars devote their whole lives continuing to look at this stuff? And I think some of that is, we have to think about the laws and think about in what ways we kind of approach them. And so we're going to look at this video. I use the Bible Project stuff a lot. So this is a Bible Project video on, how to approach the law. So
Jesse, can you, sorry, excuse me, can you make it full screen, or you know what I mean, like present mode? Because right now we're seeing
you say it's
your
small.
computer. Yeah, we're just seeing the.
I was trying not to do the full slideshow because it makes all my things go
Okay.
berserk. But here we go.
I don't know if that'll work or not. Presenter view? Is that?
I remember I have a Mac, so I don't do presenter view.
Oh.
All right. Are you still watching? You still got my video? Oh, see, okay. Hold on a second. Now I got to stop sharing.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It was just we could see the whole computer, like the whole PowerPoint screen thing.
Okay. Let's see. How about now? Okay, you should be seeing it now. All right. Ready, Freddie?
Yep.
Here we go.
If you start reading the Bible from the beginning, you'll get about halfway through the second book, Exodus, and you'll come to a bunch of ancient laws.
Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that.
Now, these laws are all written in the literary style we call prose discourse, and they're found all over the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th books of the Bible. There's over 600 laws.
And since reading ancient law code isn't something you and your friends do a lot, odds are you're going to struggle. So, let's talk about how to read the law in the Bible.
So the first thing to remember is that the Bible is not a behavior manual with a complete list of what to do and not to do to make God happy.
Right, the Bible is an epic narrative. But in the story, God does tell people what to do.
For sure. The story begins with God's plan to rule the world through humans who will trust him and live by his wisdom. And here we find the first divine command in the Bible.
Don't eat from the tree of knowing good and evil, because the day you do, you'll die.
But the humans take the authority to know and define good and evil for themselves, and it's not good. It leads to a world of violence and death, and they're exiled from the garden.
Okay, so this was the first law in the Bible?
Well, it's the first divine command, and it invites people to trust God and live by his wisdom. And so while it's not part of the laws given to Israel, it does foreshadow them, because those too are invitations to trust God's wisdom.
So when do the laws of Israel come?
Okay, here's the story. Israel is enslaved in Egypt, so God saves them and then invites them into a covenant relationship, like a marriage. And the laws make up the terms of that covenant.
And so do we get a catalog of all these laws that God gave Israel?
Actually, no, we don't get all of the laws, only examples. And these have been strategically placed in between stories about how Israel keeps violating the laws.
So I'm supposed to see that Israel's no different than the humans in the garden. They don't trust God or live by his wisdom.
Right. And so it leads to another round of tragedy, violence, and death.
And it ends in exile.
And so while the laws are good and show God's wisdom, they also expose Israel's inability to be God's faithful partners.
I'm following. But when I read the laws, I find a lot of strange stuff. Like not allowing clothing to be made of 2 different fabrics. Like how does that show God's wisdom?
Okay, so it's important to realize that many of these laws are ancient ritual symbols that set Israel apart, that is, made them holy. So some laws made Israel distinct from neighboring nations, while other laws kept them away from things that in their culture symbolized death, disease, and moral corruption.
Okay, but what about all of the ritual killing of animals?
Sacrifices were also ritual symbols that connected people to God. Since you, a mortal, can't ascend up to God's presence in the heavenly temple, a blameless animal that was offered could go up in your place, covering for your failures so you can know you're accepted by God.
I see. But not all of the laws are ancient rituals. Some of them are just about being a good person and treating others well.
Well, yes, but these laws aren't just about being good. They're about justice, which is a big deal to God. On the first page of the Bible, we learn that every human is made in God's image and is worthy of dignity. And these laws apply that ideal in Israel's day. In fact, these laws still underlie many of the concepts of justice and equality that we take for granted today.
But some of the laws don't seem just, like laws that allow for slavery.
Well, if you look at those laws in their ancient cultural context, you'll see that God's working with Israel as he finds them, pushing them towards justice. So slavery isn't abolished, but it is undermined. For example, Israel was supposed to reenact the Exodus liberation by releasing slaves and forgiving all debts every 7 years. This was revolutionary in the ancient world.
All right. Now, what about all the laws about Sabbath rest on the seventh day and all the 7-day feasts? I mean, what's up with all of these sevens?
Yeah, so these laws about sacred time are all connected to the first creation narrative in Genesis. God brings order out of chaos in 6 days that each have a clear beginning and end. But when you get to the 7th day, it has no end. That's because it's pointing to the ideal of humans partnering with God in his rule and rest. All of these 7-day feasts are rituals that symbolize humanity's true purpose and future hope.
Okay, so all of these laws given to Israel can fit into those basic categories.
Yes, and each category expresses a core ideal of God's wisdom. And the laws show how those ideals should be applied in the culture of ancient Israel.
But as the story makes clear, Israel failed at fulfilling the law over and over. How is God going to get humans to trust his wisdom?
Well, Moses and the prophets after him trusted that one day God would transform the human heart, so people can be faithful covenant partners who trust his wisdom. And that brings us to the story of Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus said he came to fulfill the law.
Right. He was the faithful covenant partner that Israel and all humanity was made to be, but has failed to be. Jesus lived by the divine ideals underlying the laws. And he taught that the laws are all fulfilled when you love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
And Jesus promised that God's Spirit would come and transform his followers so they too could live this way.
And so, when followers of Jesus read these laws today, we need to remember they were given to Israel in their ancient cultural setting. You couldn't follow many of them even if you tried.
But what you can do is see God's wisdom in the laws.
Right, and trust that God's Spirit can guide you to follow that wisdom as you learn to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay. So, thoughts? It should wowed everybody so much they have no thoughts.
Those videos are great, and I love that they put so much time and thought into them. The animations are pretty cool. So,
Well, actually a great site. It's called thebibleproject.com. They do all kinds. So what they do is, but like they're right now, they do a podcast every Monday, and it's on a theme. So for example, the theme right now is mountains and sacred mountains, and they'll take all of that podcast and then blend it into these videos. But they got videos on all kinds of things. So I go there often if I'm trying to teach and find something because they do a great job. All right. So, I kind of use that for a minute because it kind of gives us a good framework of, kind of the laws and how we might want to think about approaching them, kind of in our own lives. So just think about for a minute, and think about, has there been a time in your own life where a rule or instruction had really helped you? And if so, how did that experience shape your perspective on obedience? Nobody's a rule follower?
Well, I'm just thinking of my youth as being a kid. My mother just had to look at us and we
Yeah,
knew,
really.
Yeah.
Okay.
you know, and if you broke it, there were consequences for
Okay.
sure.
And that seems to be the way things are today, that there are no consequences. It seems like, you know, a lot goes on in schools and stuff, and there's the teachers' hands are tied, and there's, well, you know, I'm sure. And there's, I mean, I've heard people say the students are running the schools. So, you know, like, wouldn't even, I got sent home from school on the last day of school, and I was thinking sophomore, junior in high school, because I wore sandals. We weren't allowed to wear sandals to school.
Oh,
And
horrors.
yeah, compared to today. And I spent most of the morning running from one friend's to the other because we all got sent home. By the time I got done, school was over. But, you know, you didn't wear sandals again. That was for sure.
So I've got the old classic example.
Go ahead, Mark. Welcome
Mark?
home. Glad you got home safe.
Thanks. I couldn't talk. I think it's how my phone interacts with my car, and it won't let me do certain things when I'm moving and when I'm driving.
So now we know how to make him stop talking.
Actually, what I started to tell her was, I tried to say, "I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" But I couldn't get a word in edgewise because all the women were talking. So the classic example was when I was a kid, and my mom had this favorite statue on the coffee table, and when she was out one night, of course, me and my siblings were horse playing, and I dropped it and broke it, and so I hid it behind the couch, and of course, she found it missing as soon as she came home, and so she had the three of us at the time lined up, asking us what happened to her statue, blah blah blah, and nobody fessed up to anything. And then when she started looking for it, of course, she found all the broken pieces behind the couch, and then she lined us all up again. And well, I guess my guilty eyes or something. She knew I did it, and so my brother and my sister got let off, and then I had to stay behind, so to speak, and I got scolded, and I was afraid I was going to get punished or spanked or something. But anyhow, just that whole the whole situation as it unfolded. I learned not to lie. Nothing
Sounds
good
like a
comes
version
of
of
it. You're going to have to
sounds like
pay
an
for it
episode of the
later in
Brady
life.
Bunch.
I don't know if that's a rule that benefited you though. Like it wasn't.
Well, did he use the word rule? I don't.
I
Yeah, I
said ruler instruction.
a rule or instruction.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, I
Well, she told me never lie.
mm.
Mm.
I was just thinking of how kids in school sometimes they benefit. Certain kids benefit from a lot of structure. Um, some kids kind of just sort of know how to do whatever it is that they need, but other kids need the structure of you must have this notebook and this pencil and this calculator on your desk at the start of class. And they get into that routine and that helps them. And I usually go the other direction and kind of let it become the Wild West. And I've discovered that this ninth grade in particular needs a lot of the kids need really
Discipline.
the discipline and the rules. And like, if you don't do this, then a note's going home because you are not following the rules. And it's going to benefit them in the long run. So that's what comes to my mind.
Okay. Anyone else?
Now,
Chris?
I was just gonna say, from my old parochial school days, back then, and the rules of the church, and you couldn't eat meat on Friday
Mm.
was a biggie.
I
And
still don't eat meat on Friday during Lent.
yeah, but to me, it wasn't much of a sacrifice because I liked fish. So
Fish is expensive now.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, certain things, so I'm just saying that would, now I look back on it, it's silly.
Yeah. Well, part of the challenge with that kind of stuff is what's the purpose of that?
Well, for the not eating meat on Friday?
Mm-hmm.
Well, wasn't it like to be a sacrifice? Because you eat meat through the week and you could give it up.
But it's like what they were saying in the video about clothing. It sets you apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Mhm.
it's sometimes less about the denial and more a reminder of who you are. And it's that idea of being set apart. And so sometimes it's might be a challenge for us, when you have some rules and you really they seem sometimes arbitrary. Um, Sometimes they seem, just, you know, needless or what have you. Like in Deb's situation, I'm sure some of her students are sitting there and saying, these rules are asinine. Everybody knows you should have your pencil and your calculator on your desk. But, you know, that's the way kind of things are. If you have your Bibles, you can open them to Deuteronomy chapter 4. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it because I'm going to share my screen. And so what we're looking at is Deuteronomy. We're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 through 14. Um, Now, the Bible I have teed up here is um, the what is it? It's the English Standard Version. It's the one that I typically use, but might be a little different than yours. So, and now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you, and do them that you might live, and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor. For the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And what a great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this law that I set before you today. Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on earth, and that they may teach their children so. And you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain while the mountain burned with the fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sounds of the words, but saw no form. There was only a voice, and he declared to you this covenant, which he commanded you to perform, that is, the 10 Commandments. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and rules, that you might do them in the land that you are going over to possess. So as you think about that scripture, as you kind of skim it again for yourself, kind of take it in a little bit, anything seem to strike you, resonate with you, maybe confuse you?
This is to be told through generations.
Okay. So here we have this idea again of kind of remembering. So it's to the generations. So let's look at verse number 1 for a minute. And it says, "And now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you, and do them, that you may live." Okay, what do you think the connection is between doing the rules and living?
For all the reasons, the 4 reasons outlined in that or summarized in that video, that those constitute a sort of a life that carries on. The things about, justice and I forget what the other,
There's holiness,
yeah,
justice. I forget the other two.
Yeah, but-
Sacrifice and sacred time.
There you go.
yes. But that they, all of those things mean living life and living it well. So like the holiness part reminds me of when we were talking about holiness is dangerous. And so if you don't obey the rules about respecting holiness, you could end up dead like Aaron's sons did, um, getting too close to the fire and whatnot. So
Okay.
thinking along those lines.
And I think it has something to do, it has to do with trusting God by doing these.
Okay. So let's think about this word live a minute. So you're going to do this so you may live. What is living? Nobody knows what living is.
Well, I think
We
it's-
even have some like medical professionals here that should kind of know what that means.
Yeah, well, it's more than just surviving. I think it's
Mhm.
to be able to enjoy life and living life to its fullest.
Okay, I get, yeah, I get that. And so Herman, what you're doing is, kind of taken from the Gospel of John, John 10:10, where Jesus said that I have come that you might have life and have it to the full, or that you could have abundant life.
Mhm.
But, in some ways, what's required to have abundant life. So if you're a Jewish person, because remember, this is being written to Jewish persons, let's not forget who they're who Moses is talking to. And we also got to think about, okay, what does this kind of represent? In the sense that, here we are, it's the parting sermon before you go into what? The promised land. All right. And so as you think about this idea that you're going to live, it's kind of what? To live in the promised land. Okay. So as we've talked a little bit about this idea of the promised land before, what does that represent?
Well, they were promised that in the covenant
Okay.
They wouldn't have land,
Mm-hmm.
and God's fulfilling that.
Okay. So in some ways, it's we're looking at it as the fulfillment of the second part of God's covenant. So God had a covenant with Abraham, and he said, "Hey, you come be my people. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you with numerous people, and I'm going to bless you with land."
But then they're to make God known also,
Right.
like they're to be the representation.
The second part of that covenant is I'm
So
going to bless you so that you can bless other
make
people. So other people can come to know who this God is that they worship. So yeah, that's all important, but in some ways you need to think Jewish.
It's the modern Garden of Eden.
There you go. There you go. So if you're going to think Jewish, two things in the Old Testament, you think Jewish. You think garden and you think Exodus. Okay. And they're kind of related, right? Because what is the purpose of the Exodus? To move them back into the
The garden.
garden. So the story starts with the garden. Okay. So if we think about this idea of garden, okay, um, think about Adam, think about Eve, think about the snake. What was their conversation about? Begins with L and ends with E, and if's in the middle. Life. And think about it. Here's this snake, and it's talking to Adam and Eve, primarily to Eve. Adam's there, but and the snake says, "Hey, what did God really tell you?"
Mm.
And she says, "Well, God says that, we shouldn't, eat from the tree of
Life,
Knowledge.
knowledge.
knowledge of good and evil." And then she adds to it and says, "And he even said we shouldn't touch it because on the day that we do, we are going to
Die.
die." And what's the snake come back and say?
Yeah, you're not gonna die. It'll be fine.
God, he's saying God's a liar. You're not going to die. He says you're going to eat from that tree, that fruit, and
Be
you're
just
going to
like
do
him.
what?
You're gonna be just like him.
Yeah, you're going to live. You're going to be just like God. And so they're taken in by the snake's ruse, and they eat of the fruit. And we know the rest of the story. Okay. God comes, he understands that they've, can just sense that they've done something wrong, asks them, they hide, all that kind of stuff. He clothes them. But ultimately, what did that do? That created a situation where death came into the garden and they were expelled from the garden. Okay. And that sets this in motion, this movement forward through the Old Testament. Okay. So there's always this exodus, this movement to try to push and get the people back into the garden. And so in some ways, here they are on the brink of the Jordan River to go into the promised land that God has for them. And so that's kind of the idea, the image of kind of moving back into Eden. And so, when we think about life, okay, life for a Jewish person is surrounded by what?
God.
God, the being in the presence, and not just being in the presence, but living in the presence of God. Okay, so when Jesus says that I've come that you might have life and have it to the full, he's not talking about number of years, but he's talking about, living in the presence of God, not living in the midst of brokenness and chaos.
So
And so,
for
go ahead.
so for the Jewish, like the Orthodox, they live so much by the rules and the laws.
Right.
So they're basically, as they're living in those laws, they're living in God's presence, is sort of
Right.
like what they believe, or maybe
Yeah, well,
they are.
Well, think back to the video for a minute. So what did you hear from the video? What are the balls? Are the rules primarily just a set of rules that govern behavior? So is it a behavior book?
No.
No, it's all
No.
everything.
No. And so in some ways it's a way that you follow those rules, and so you're continually reminded about the presence of God. Okay? So even in sort of the mundane things of life, we still see, feel, and can experience the presence of God. And if we think about it for a minute, in some ways, when we look at our, Orthodox Jewish brothers and sisters, in some ways, we would say, that seems to be, following all of those rules like they are. First of all, it seems exhausting to me. Okay, it seems exhausting. It's exhausting to try to fulfill them, but also exhausting to try to remember them. Okay, but in some ways, they have something that I do not, because as Protestant Christians, what have we done? We divorce ourselves from the law. If we think about the New Testament, we think about Jesus, we think about Paul and what Paul wrote. What did he say? Jesus says, he came to fulfill the law. And Paul says we're no longer what? Bound to the law. We're bound to Jesus, which is true. I'm not discounting that at all. But what I am saying is, because we've moved away from the law, in some ways, I think we fail many times in many moments to really experience and remember the presence of God. And
But again, some of the things are just so, I don't want to say out there. That sounds so disrespectful. But like, they didn't have electricity back in those days, but yet they have rules about electricity today. Like,
yeah, well, think about, okay, so remember, they're not strictly about behavior, okay, in the sense that, you can't use ancient rules to govern, behavior in the 21st century. But what we can do is use those laws as guides, as meditation literature. So, okay, we're not in ancient Israel, and so, but they had laws governing work. Okay, so Sabbath was a holy day, and you're supposed to refrain from work, right?
yeah.
And so, what you do is you're beginning to meditate on that. Okay, so I'm not supposed to work and I'm supposed to rest. Okay, what did that look like for an ancient Israelite? But now, what does that look like for me? And how do I understand, the spirit of those laws? Okay, and how do I adapt them? And in some ways, implement them, maybe not necessarily, verbatim, but the general principle, the idea behind the laws in my own context.
Well, would that be an individual's choice or would that be a choice of
Well,
whatever?
if you're on this side of the Enlightenment, okay, we say it's an individual choice. But if you're an ancient Israelite, it was an individual
Yeah,
choice.
yeah, right.
It's community. We are wired to think differently. So ever since, the Enlightenment, where, there's this self-actualization and, the birth of science and rational thought and all that kind of stuff, there's the emergence of the individual and the rights of the individual to kind of self-govern. Okay. And so in some ways, as we get past that, we've tossed aside the communal nature. Now, the thing is, you think about it, okay, um, let's think about it this way. So, I grew up Roman Catholic. Okay, so just like Mark, just like Chris, I grew up on the Lent laws. Okay, so you needed to abstain from meat on Friday. Okay.
Mhm.
Is it easier to do that on your own, or is it easier to do it in community?
I would think it'd be easier to do it as a community.
Right, right. So if I'm at work and I'm surrounded by a bunch of folks that are Roman Catholic, and we're all following the rules, we can encourage one another, but we can also remind one another. Okay. And so, following those rules or trying to understand and, you know, follow those rules becomes a bit easier in community. That's, you think about the Orthodox, where do they typically hang out?
In their own community.
In their own community. Okay, because it's a way. It's not only it not only helps with following the rules, but those rules kind of bring you together. Okay, and that's the idea here. So as let's not lose sight of okay, what is the purpose of the laws? Rather, so let's not lose sight of that and kind of distill it down into okay, these are the behaviors. Again, meditative literature, okay, in which we kind of begin to think about it. Now, how can we, if we're thinking about this, in ancient times, what about in our times? What does it really look like for us as contemporary Christians to live? Now, Jesus said that I've come in order that you might have life and have it to the full.
Reminds me of that Micah verse about acting
Mm.
justly, loving faithfulness, and walking humbly with your God.
Mm-hmm. Micah, I think it's Micah 6.
Mhm. I think it's hard sometimes in the 20th century because we don't have, in some ways, we don't have the sense of community that the Israelites had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
It
So
can look
go
like
ahead. I'm sorry.
well, when I was just thinking what Nancy said, but it can look like that when you are doing um, outreach to others and loving your community through service.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about this idea of living, but what is living also connected to?
God.
Okay.
Making God
Good.
known.
Okay. How about what's the second part of that? I stopped prematurely when I was reading. I did that intentionally. So, and now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you and do them that you may live. But then what's the next part?
And go and take the
Go
possession.
in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. Think about that. So what do we have here? We have a generation of people, okay, who are standing on the brink of going into the promised land. What did their mom and dad and grandparents do?
They blew it.
They were in the same place and they failed to live. They failed to go into the promised land. They failed to go into the garden that God was giving them. And so, part of that living is, going into the land that God has given them. Now, does it sounds nice, but what do we also have to remember about this land?
People were there.
So the same things that the spies said 40 years ago are the same things that they would say now. Did the giants leave?
No.
No, they just have sons that are giants. Okay. And so the same challenges that came up with that first generation are the same challenges that come up with the second generation. And so,
And probably this time around, there was even more of them.
Probably, yeah, yeah. And so, you have that challenge that, we want to live. We want to live. We want an abundant life. Everybody want abundant life?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, when we talk about abundant life, we're not talking about lots of things. Okay. We're not talking about stuff. We're talking about, you know, we're talking about Garden of Eden kind of living,
Milk and
living
honey.
where we know, huh?
Milk and honey.
Well, yeah, well, and what's that milk and honey? It's living and basking and being in the presence of God. And part of that, living and being in the presence of God is also knowing who you are and being comfortable with that. Okay. And some of that, if we're going to live that way, we need to be a little bit different than Adam and Eve were, in the sense that, when they had this conversation with the snake about life, ultimately, what was the snake doing?
Tricking them.
Tricking. Well, in what way?
Lying.
Okay, lying and to what end?
Like he was convincing them.
Of what?
That he was right,
That-
God was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in some ways, he was really trying to get them to mistrust God. Okay. God really doesn't want the very best for you. God wants to be God, and God, he just wants to hold you back.
Mm.
Did you ever hear that from your kids?
Mm.
So as a parent, you're trying to, put the brakes on for a little bit.
Mm.
Why?
Because you want what's best for them.
Because you've been there, you've done that, you already know. You know what?
Mhm.
You have some wisdom. Okay. You have some wisdom that maybe they don't have quite yet. Okay. And so what you're trying to do is try to prevent them from heartache. And, in some ways, they're, Adam and Eve were questioning. the wisdom of God. And, we need to think about that, as well. We want to have life. Everybody said they wanted to have life. Okay. So if we want to have life, means first of all, we need to listen and obey God. And, go in and take possession of the land that God has given us. Other thoughts about that?
Just thinking of like human nature and how weird a creature a human is. The minute you tell a human don't do that, then they're going to do it.
The cookie jar effect.
Cookie jar effect or whatever you want to, anything like that. It's
Yeah,
just
that was
like,
just what I was going to say.
yeah, the
It's-
minute you say don't do it,
I've often thought, Adam and Eve, in a way, they got a really bad rap because they had no frame of reference. There's nobody to tell them, yeah, well, I screwed up and look what happened to me. And again, like you said, you tell them that the fastest way to get your kids to do something is to tell them not to.
that's why all of this drug prevention stuff we do at school, I almost wish we would just stop it, because the minute you say don't do that, it's like,
But
That
look
should
how
be said for anything.
successful, trying to get people to stop smoking cigarettes. I mean, to the point that people said, don't even come and apply for a job if you're a smoker. And that seemed to, I mean, I think, hardly anybody smokes. There's few I see every once in a while. But, I just never quite understood that. But yeah, you tell them not to do it, they're going to try it anyway.
yeah, but you're right. I think seeing the effects, maybe, now knowing what the dangers actually are, but there's some stuff that just, kids especially, the minute that you tell them something's dangerous or don't do it, they're going to just try and see for themselves. They
Yeah.
don't quite believe you somehow.
Yeah.
Why is that?
That'd be great to know. Why?
Human nature.
Yeah.
Could it be that it's baked into us from
Mhm.
an ancient garden many, many, many moons ago?
Mhm.
Well, if my mother told me not to do something, she had radar. She knew whether I was doing it or not. So I could never escape. I was always afraid she'd find out.
So we've been talking a little bit about the relationship between kind of the God's wisdom, the wisdom that's found in God's laws, and obedience to those laws so that we can live. We kind of go on to verse number 2. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. So, why do you think God is so strict about not adding or subtracting from his commandments?
Because we have a
See?
tendency to do that.
Okay.
We twist ourselves into knots trying to figure out how to get around laws.
God doesn't need an editor.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
God is God.
Okay.
He said it. Why should there be a question? What part didn't you understand?
God's
Yeah.
what's that thing say? God said it, I believe it. So be it, or something like that.
I never saw that. Yeah.
So what's yeah, I agree with you in theory. But I would challenge you in practicality. What's the reason that I say that?
Well, I guess because, like we said, we're in the 21st century. there's some things we just can't do that he expected them to do back in the Moses' time.
Okay.
A lot of them just don't make sense to us anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of them don't make sense to us anymore.
Are people still burning animal sacrifices in places?
Ethiopia.
Yeah, not generally speaking in small pockets of people. You know, the for the Israelites, sacrifice was stopped in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple. So yeah, just think about kind of the world we live in today. Okay. Um, and think about how do people approach and interpret the Bible.
Well, this Jewish Orthodox lady that I follow, she always says we were taught to live by the rules but not die by them. So if they live by them, but if anything is going to cause death or harm, then they're not supposed to do it. If that makes sense.
But we twist them and make them more to our liking. Then we actually do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The ancients did too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the kind of thing is when we use words like that, or when we take and we just take maybe proof text, take that out, we get this, okay, God said it, I believe it, so be it. Sometimes, so you have, what about fundamentalists? You have the sects of Christianity that are very fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do they typically do?
They forbid everything.
They have a very, huh?
They forbid everything, just about.
Yeah, but why is that? They have a
They
very,
think it's anti-God, or it's not what God wants you to do.
yeah, but where does it come from? It comes from a literalist interpretation of the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, Bible says no dancing, therefore no dancing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say no dancing.
I know it doesn't, but
Okay.
but it says other things. It says you shouldn't eat pigs. Okay. So, in some ways, you need to think about, what does it mean about not adding and subtracting, from God's commands. And again, how would Jesus have approached this?
Well, he was more interested in the spirit of the law and not the letter of the law.
Right. Exactly. And so that's why, when we think about, this kind of, shall not add to the word that I command you. It's not like the literal interpretation of the law. It's ruminating and meditating on it. And it's that spirit of the law. And so, as they were challenged by, obedience to God's law, in similar ways that we're being challenged, as well. Other thoughts?
My problem with the fundamentalists is that not everybody, but a lot of the stuff that's in the Bible is allegorical. And they don't see it that way.
Well, yeah, and
For instance, you can handle snakes. If you're really a Christian, you can handle snakes and not get bitten. That doesn't mean you can handle snakes. It means you can deal with what the world is going to give you and not fall prey to it.
well, yep. Again, challenges about how we look at the Bible, how we approach the Bible, how we see it, because we're all about a bit different and how we kind of read and kind of interpret things. All right. Well, it's 8:15, so